So, when I first met my freshman college roommate, she seemed kind of like a stoner, like the music she told me she liked, the posters she put up on the wall. I never met this girl, it was my first time talking to her. She talked kind of slowly, everything was like sort of chill, and I kind of just thought that she was sort of this like stoner kind of like, doesn't care about work, doesn't care about anything. And then obviously we lived together for a year, and she turned out to be an amazing friend. She was so smart. She did really well in school. She was a fantastic writer. She had all of these great opinions about things. She talked about politics. She talked about, she knew a lot about a lot of things. Meanwhile, I first met this girl, and I'm like, oh, she probably killed all her brain cells smoking pot, But she really turned out to be like absolutely, totally different from what I thought she was going to be. And she turned out to be one of the best friends I ended up having at school.
This is Ms. Diamora, a math teacher at Scarsdale High School. And while her story about friendship may seem like one you've heard 1,000 times, if you analyze the story, it's actually much more complex than you think.
You're
listening to Radio Blast.
Hi, I'm Matt.
And I'm Michael.
And today we're exploring what exactly is going on when we meet someone new for the first time. At first, Miss Diamora's roommate gives off the impression of someone she wouldn't like.
Miss Diamora's roommate seemed like a stoner. As you can imagine, the first impression seemed final to Miss Diamora. However, by spending time with her roommate, Miss Diamora realizes that they actually had things in common.
So, what we want to find out is, during an encounter with someone, how crucial is the first impression, and how hard is it to change our minds about someone? So, I'm sure you've heard of the 7 seconds rule, right?
I think so.
Well, basically, it's a general rule that when we've met someone new, we've already made up our minds about them in 7 seconds.
Well, is it true?
We interviewed Dr. Hess,
a professor of psychology at SUNY Purchase. Here she is.
The 7-second rule, I've actually never heard of it said as 7 seconds, but there is no literal such thing.
So there's no such thing.
But listen to what she has to say next.
So there's definitely a truth to the fact that we form these first impressions, and the thing though is they're not permanent, right? It's not that they don't change, that they completely influence what you think forever. So what they do is they bias the way you see the person later on. So basically, a lot of us, what we go through is known as a confirmation bias.
Confirmation bias? What's that?
So basically, the idea is when you already believe something, we seek evidence to prove it or confirm it, but we don't look for the evidence to prove us wrong.
And when you're looking to prove something, you notice the stuff that proves it, and you don't necessarily notice the things that would disprove it. So, even though it may not be a set rule, such as 7 seconds, the key part of any relationship is its threshold, the very beginning.
The first small part of any relationship has a huge amount of power over both people.
Exactly. But how much of an effect does the first encounter have on those people? How much of a lasting effect do first encounters have on you?
My wife and I talk a lot about, whether or not, can you size someone up pretty early, or one phrase we use, do you get a second chance at a first impression? And I don't think you do. I don't think you get a second chance at a first impression, but you can change someone's mind, I think. And I think it's a sign of maturity. I think it's a sign of growth that if you can admit to yourself that you are wrong. But I do think that people have to be conscious of the opinions that they form right away. I mean, whether it's the way someone dresses, whether it's the way someone speaks, whether it's the way someone carries themselves. We size each other up, I think, for the wrong reasons. And I think we have to be very cognizant of that.
That was Dean Sweeney, a dean at Scarsdale High School.
We asked him what he thinks about first impressions and their long-term effects.
We have to be conscious of the opinions we form. We have to keep in mind that person's mood and how the time and place affects our impression or their impression. Look, if I were to make a poor decision about someone today, that could harm any interaction we have after that.
So, what exactly goes into how we judge someone else in that first encounter?
We asked Dr. Hess what factors contribute to the judgments we make about somebody.
How does our environment impact our decisions about other people?
It does have a lot to do with the environment. So the environment can give you kind of contextual cues that can also make you think of certain stereotypes and the like. And the thing about stereotypes is that basically they're just associations that we have between a certain group of people and what traits that they have, right?
What does that have to do with making opinions about someone?
So if you see someone in an impoverished urban area, that might activate your stereotypes of that kind of a person, and then you'll think about the traits associated with it.
Wow, so that's really not a good thing, is it?
Yeah, but it does happen.
Yeah, speaking for myself at least, I can say I've judged someone based on stereotypes at least once before.
I think everyone has at one point or another.
Right, and that's what you'll expect out of them. You'll think that they must be that kind of person because that's your stereotype. So the context can kind of prime you to think about these stereotypes and expect them, but there isn't a lot of research on the context as of now. Most of the research so far has really focused on here's a picture of a person, and it's only until recently that they've really started to show you the picture of the person in some sort of context to see how the environment really influences it.
It, of course, being the decisions we make about other people, but how does our mood come into play?
That your mood influences how you process information in general. So if you're in a sad mood, you tend to pay more attention to information, like little details. You kind of become a little more detail-oriented. And when you're in a good mood, sometimes you'll ignore information, especially if you think it's going to ruin your good mood. You just don't process it carefully, and you kind of just accept it at face value and refuse to think about it. So I'm sure those things would generalize to how you think about a person, but I don't know of any specific research looking at mood and then how you judge a person afterward.
And don't forget about confirmation bias. It's another factor that contributes to the judgments we make about people.
When you look for something you think is right to confirm your suspicions. In this way, we often use this to cover up the other things people do.
I think it boils down to admitting that you're wrong.
And we can use confirmation bias with Miss Diamora's situation.
Oh, like how she didn't know about the similarities between her roommate and herself. She only looked for details to confirm her negative view of her roommate.
And this can be applied in the opposite situation too.
Right. So if you were, for example, to meet a superhero, you might only look for the good things in him. And even though he might be a real jerk, the confirmation bias will actually keep you from seeing that.
So the next thing we need to know is what really counts as a relationship.
We interviewed a different Dean Nancy Thompson, and she told us about the relationships via social networking versus getting to the core of someone and really knowing what defines them.
Why? Why do we need to know the person so well and not just go along with who they're pretending to be?
Well, because I think that really gets at the core of what real relationships are.
Gets at the core of what real relationships are.
Right? I think you need to be able to understand someone's, sort of good and bad, their faults, their insecurities.
Why? Why do we need to understand someone's faults and insecurities?
To really be able to have a deeper relationship with someone. And again, it's kind of veiled through social networking, where that person on the other end is, they are choosing what they are putting up there or not putting up there, right? And again, you can get to know them to a certain extent, but oftentimes I think sometimes, social networking can allow people to almost create like a character for themselves of who they, how much of themselves they want to put out there or don't want to put out there. And so I think really gets at the heart of what really genuine, true relationships are all about. Kind of seeing someone from all aspects, all sides.
So, are you saying that we should know everyone we meet down to the core? How is that possible?
Well, as humans, we naturally tend to reserve ourselves. And because of the incredible number of people we may meet on a day-to-day basis, we don't have that crucial beginning of the relationship with everyone.
We don't necessarily expect to interact with everybody forever, right? We have a lot of interactions in our day-to-day that are meant to be temporary, one-time things.
Right.
To the coffee shop and you deal with the barista and they're not going to become your next best friend, right? And that's not a function of we're throwing people away. It's just a matter of how life is. And there are limits to how many people we can have in our lives. You can only maintain so many connections with people, right? Even when you think of having 500 from Facebook, they're not literally all your friends, right? You don't actually know all the details of what's going on each of their lives. You're not communicating with them regularly.
Now we want to figure out what defines someone's personality, and how does it factor into making relationships.
Well, we know about introvert and extrovert, but what we're kind of asking about is nature versus nurture. And, going along with the theme of how hard is it to change someone's personality, we explored exactly how society shaped our predispositioned personality.
So this is the nature versus nurture
Right,
question,
yeah.
and it's both. There's definitely a heritable component to personality. The parents' scores on personality measures will link to the child's, and some of that will be nurture, that they raise their child a certain way to be like them.
So that's nurture, but what about nature?
And part of it is also nature. So if you look at infants, they have different temperaments. So they might not have very clear personalities, but they have kind of the starting basis of personality. So generally it's either like they might be easygoing, right? The babies who never cry and are happy with everything and love being around people. And those babies are more likely to end up being extroverted later on than the babies that are more difficult or slower. So there does seem to be some amount of personality that you can start to see manifesting really young in children, where you wouldn't think it was just learned. It's clearly kind of some sort of genetic difference that they have in terms of especially how much anxiety they tend to experience in new situations.
And actually, there's been research with monkeys on the matter of nature versus nurture.
How so?
For example, they'll take a very anxious young monkey and raise it with a calm mother, and while the monkey will retain a lot of its energetic composition, it's clear that it is more calm with the mother.
And what's really interesting is that when I put the monkey back with the crowd of anxious monkeys, it will actually revert back to its anxious behavior.
Right, so it's clear there is the genetic kind of predisposition, but with a good upbringing you can overcome some of that, but that doesn't mean you don't still have it at your core to some extent. So it's definitely an interplay of both the environment and what you were born with working together to create who you end up being.
So society is pretty easily able to change our personality.
Yeah, in fact, it really happens all the time.
So in the United States, we tend to value extroversion. We like the go-getters, the people who are assertive. But in other cultures, it's really preferable to be more introverted, right? Where they focus on group harmony, getting along with the team, not being the odd man out who's constantly pushing for what they want. So in those cultures, if you happen to be extroverted, or if you're an American who traveled abroad to China, for example, you might actually want to train yourself to be a little more reserved and introverted so that you fit in better with what the culture expects of people. But in the United States, nobody would go in that direction.
Okay, so different cultures produce different personalities. How exactly does that work and factor into our relationships?
So how do personalities factor into making relationships?
So there's a small effect of similarity. So there is kind of a small relationship between being similar and forming a relationship and also having it last a long time. It's not hugely, it's not a really large effect, but there isn't really much evidence to suggest that being complementary or being really different is good. There's no real research that's found that. So when people kind of say, oh, well, I'm so neurotic and they're so calm and that's perfect because we balance each other out, there's no scientific research to really support that. It doesn't mean it might not work for a particular couple, but in the grand scheme of things, there's no real evidence that that's kind of a big thing.
So when we meet someone new, it usually doesn't occur to us to make a lasting relationship with him or her.
If and when we decide to make a lasting relationship, the very beginning is clearly the most important part in determining how the relationship will play out. So people are different. Some people are more social and know how to make strong relationships, and others have trouble making relationships. But either way, humans are social beings, and we need to interact and make relationships. So if you look at someone like Meursault from The Stranger, he is really bad at making relationships because he doesn't even attempt to connect with people.
No, I don't think it's possible for him to make relationships at all, because he lacks the qualities necessary to make relationships. For example, when he thinks he's in a relationship with Marie, he's really not using any of our criteria, that we can tell.
Stereotypes?
No.
Personality?
No.
Confirmation bias?
No.
How about mood?
No. So, in all, Rousseau doesn't judge Marie at all.
Well, couldn't that be a good thing?
Yeah, we think that it's not good to judge someone, but we just found out that judging someone is necessary for any relationship to exist. In order to really know someone, to maintain a solid relationship with them, we have to make judgments. I'm Matt.
And I'm Michael.
Thanks for listening to Radio Blast.